Helmsmen and pilots worked against each other during the Fremantle Allision. This is from the Maritime Exclusive, and it was published on the 16th of April 2025. In an interim fact-finding report on the Allision involving the box ship Mircico at Fremantle last year suggests that the vessel's helmsman and pilots were operating with different goals. The helmsman was actively steering to maintain a heading of 83 degrees. The last received helm order. Meanwhile, the pilots were trying to make an emergency turn to port using full ahead thrust, assist tugs, bow thrusters, and the port anchor, unaware that their helmsman was applying starboard rudder to counteract them. The ship hit an historic tall ship and a museum, causing considerable damage. In the early hours of August 22, 2024, the ship began heading inbound into Fremantle's harbor and took aboard 2 pilots. The primary pilot assigned to the transit was fatigued, so the backup pilot took charge during the master pilot exchange. At 6:10, as they entered the narrow entrance channel for the inner harbor, southwesterly winds picked up to about 40 knots on the starboard quarter. The ship began to swing starboard. The pilot ordered the helmsman to steer 83 degrees. The helmsman correctly acknowledged the order at about 6:13:45. This was the heading that the helmsman would try to maintain throughout the final minutes of the casualty sequence. At the time that order was given, the helmsman had a rudder hard to port to counteract the effects of the strengthening wind. It wasn't enough to do the job, and the ship's heading was about 4 degrees off to the starboard, or 87 degrees. The master suggested going to full ahead to increase steering forces, and at about 6:14:34 the pilot agreed. There was a pier ahead and they needed to turn to port fast in order to enter the harbor. With more power and a series of assist tug movements, the ship began to swing back to port. As it swung back from 87 degrees through 86, the helmsman moved to check the swing. He brought the helm to midship. The vessel steadied up squarely on 83 degrees, the last ordered heading he had received, which was straight towards the pier. The pilot was unsure why the vessel had stopped swinging to port, and at 6:15:33, he told the fatigued secondary pilot that something was wrong. The secondary pilot had been on a phone conversation at the back of the bridge and had not been involved in the back and forth among the bridge team, but he interrupted the call and joined the decision-making process. Together, without checking with the helmsman, they began working the assist tugs to try and turn the ship. The rudder was amidship at this point, and the helmsman was maintaining a steady heading of 83.5 degrees towards the moored tall ship STS Lewin-2, now less than a ship length away, with the box ship ahead and making 7 knots. At 6:15:54, the master put the bow thruster full to port. At 6:16:10, the secondary pilot ordered stop engines and then full astern, and the master ordered the crew to prepare to drop the port anchor. At 6:16:21, as these emergency measures to turn to port were underway, the helmsman applied more starboard rudder to try and counteract the effort to turn to port. The rudder would be over to starboard as much as 29 degrees over the course of the next minute. At 6:16:49, the engines reached full astern and the ship began to slow. The anchor, tugs, and bow thruster managed to start to swing to port, but not fast enough to avert an allision. At 6:18, the ship hit the STS Lewin-2 at about 3 knots, dismasting the sailing vessel and prompting 2 crew members aboard to flee onto the pier. They escaped with minor injuries. The ship came to a full stop at about 6:18:30, but continued to spin in place. The bow thrusters were still full to port, and the ship was swinging to port at about 13 degrees per minute. At 6:19:52, the master noted to the pilot that the bow thrusters were still running with full power to port, and the thrusters were shut down, but not quickly enough to prevent contact in the narrow confines of the harbor. 40 seconds later, a stack of containers on the starboard quarter hit the roof of the Western Australia Maritime Museum. The ships all scraped along the wharf for a short distance, damaging the quayside and breaching a small section of the hull plating above the waterline. The ATSB continues to investigate and will release a full report, including its formal conclusions, when it has completed its review. So do you think the helmsman still has a job? Maybe he does, but he's probably cleaning the toilets or something like that. He's definitely not on the bridge. Did he not look out the window? Did he not hear what was going on? Why is everybody all freaked out trying to turn this ship one way, and he's fighting to maintain a heading that he was given minutes before? But as you can see from this report, things happen in seconds, half a second, quarter of a second. It happens fast. The times given here was right to the very second of when it happened, and things were happening very, very fast. But the guy, the helmsman, had to know something was up, and maintaining 83 degrees was no longer very important, especially considering he was heading straight to another vessel. Look out the window, dude. Open your ears. There's definitely something going on that you should be aware of. You're the one controlling this ship, at least in part, and fighting with what everybody else was doing. Like, they tried hard. This happened really fast, but they tried hard. They even dropped the anchor. They had 2 tugs. I covered this when it happened, and it just didn't make any sense that it could happen, especially with 2 tugs on her. With 2 tugs on her and everything that was going on. There was a lot of wind. It's very narrow. There's very little space. But something drastic had to go wrong, and it was the helmsman. Unbelievable when you think about it. No idea what's happening with this tall ship, if they got her repaired or not. I know that was the initial plan, but it was probably a pretty big job. No idea exactly how much damage there was on her, but hopefully they can get her back in service. She was a beautiful vessel, and hopefully she gets back to work doing what she does. Alright guys, there it is. As always, thanks for watching. If you're new here and you like these kind of videos, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. I'll see you on the next one.